Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to a meta report. This is something I'm going to be doing probably just for every patch. We usually get about a week's warning before the next patch comes out, and the next patch is coming out in the next 2 to 3 days. So I thought I'd go over the tier list for ranked play as to which decks where and things like that, and what you should be looking at and how they change coming into the next patch in terms of balance. Now, before we start, a couple things. First of all, at first I wanted to do like token deck lists, and I would go through them in the deck builder, but there's way too many decks, so I'm not doing that. I'm just going over the heroes, and I'm not going in order on the screen, obviously, but I'm going in order of the little notepad I've got with me, so I'll go through that. Second thing, if your deck is on here and it's lower down than you think it should be, by all means, tell me in the comments, but I don't mean any harm to that person by saying their deck is bad. That's just a quick thing. In a lot of cases, I actually don't know some of the people that made them, so don't feel like it's a personal attack if I think that the deck that you have been playing is bad, even though you like it. Third thing, the way I'm doing tiers. So I've got no point tier, so I don't have like 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, etc. I've got 4 tiers. Tier 1 is the best deck in the game. Now, this is the best deck. It would usually only be one thing in Tier 1, maybe 2 if it was really close, but it'll be one thing in Tier 1. Tier 2 is good. Anything that you will see on ladder, any like playable deck on ladder with a really high win rate, like 70-80%, the kind of stuff you'll be seeing in top 10. Tier 3 is okay, like can be used, especially in tournaments, it can be used as like a surprise thing, or if you're good with the deck, it can be good, or if it's particularly good in the metagame for that day, you can use it. That's Tier 3. Tier 4 is awful. Now, well, not awful, it just means I would not use it. I haven't gone below Tier 4 because it pretty much, well, in Tier 4, there's a lot more disparity between the power level of decks. The general consensus is they're just not worth picking up for ranks. So, first things first, let's start with Tier 1. Advanced Zash variants, monocolor Advanced Zash variants. I voiced this quite heavily, but going 2-color with Advanced Zash actually weakens the deck. Now, Zash the Annihilator has kind of taken over the metagame since the last patch, and the reason for it is because his hero power is ridiculous against mid-range decks. And there's a lot of mid-range decks. He doesn't really have any bad matchups. Dominion can be a bit rough because of Helm Dominion, but it's not that bad. You can still beat it fairly easily with aggressive openings, and it's just the best deck right now. It doesn't really have any bad matchups, and most of the matchups are not astonishingly good, with the exception of Neva. Most of the matchups are not astonishingly good, they're about 50 to 60, but the point is, if you play better than your opponent, and you're playing Advanced Zash, the Zash deck will probably win. That's basically how it goes. It's also one of the more consistent decks because it's running, 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, but it's also running a solid late game in Phoenixes, and some run Dragons, but mostly Phoenixes. The most common versions of Advanced Zash are mid-rangey variants. There's a couple aggro variants that are running Advanced Zash as well. I think those are about the same win rate, slightly weaker probably, and Control Zash I don't think is as good as mid-range Zash. So I won't spend too much time talking about this since you guys all know about these things. But yeah, Advanced Zash is the best deck right now in my opinion. Monocolor Advanced Zash, keep in mind. Next, we've got Tier 2. Starting with, I'm not going in any particular order, by the way, in terms of power level. I'm just going the way it's on my notepad. Blue-red variants. Now, blue-red variants come in 3 forms. You've got Zash, Advanced Zash at the head of blue-red variants. Then you've got Basic Darius and Elrike. As I said earlier, the blue-red variants, if you go away from mono, you weaken mono-red a bit, and the reason for it is because of Word of Fire, and with Phoenixes everywhere, you need the 3 levels in Word of Fire to take them out for free, basically, and that's what swings the matchup massively, is you can spend 4 mana to kill the Phoenix 1-for-1 with a Fireball and a Word of Fire, or 4 mana to kill it for free, or you can also use a Hero Power and a Word of Fire. It's important. Whereas if you're playing Darius or Elrike, you don't have access to that 3 red, and you also don't have access to Advanced Zash's Hero Power, which makes you worse in the mirror, and the rest of the matchups stay about the same. But anyway, As far as Elric and Darius goes, they build slightly differently. Darius is more of a draw-based one, sustained ability, so a lot of aggressive builds are on it, like Kindle's tournament deck. That one of the tournament decks he won Asperia with last was a aggro red deck running Darius to sustain the deck. It's a lot more consistent. Elric's hero power is mostly used to copy Phoenixes. I know that Kindle in particular doesn't like Elric Blue, and he thinks Darius Blue is just better in pretty much every case. I haven't tested it enough to confirm or deny that, but that is something he said, and he won the last Asperia, so take that for what you will. But the point is that he did say that having tried out some of the Elric decks, he thinks that just switching out Elric for Darius in blue-red would just make the deck better. I think Elric will show up a bit more in Tier 2 with a couple other different types of decks, but he also shows up here just as a blue-red option for a hero. Alright, on to the next set of Tier 2 decks. We've got Advanced Neva Variants. Now, the reason I say Advanced Neva Variants is because there are three. First of all, Advanced Neva is not popular. I haven't run into an Advanced Neva deck in ages, even though I think it's very powerful. It's not the best deck. It's not broken by any means. It can run about 70 to 80% win rate if played perfectly. It's a very hard deck to play, by the way, so like I've been playing Advanced Neva for about a week and a half now, and I'm still making mistakes almost every game, and it's aggravating. But the point is, it's a hard deck to play. There are three variants that are reasonably common whenever you do see them. Mono green, because you can run Treants basically and just pummel through people with 4 Fae for Treant, and you could even run Caulifla if you want to, and some bounce. There's Overwhelming Forces with Dominion, or a slightly more controlling one with Helms, like you've seen my deck tech on it. I've got a couple deck techs on some of these things, so if you go into my my videos, you should see a few on some of these decks. But sorry. Anyway, but yeah, that was Wisdom Dominion. There's also Kindle's version. He was the only person playing Advanced Neva at the last Asperia, which was baffling. Quite frankly, he was the only copy of Advanced Neva in the entire tournament, and it did very, very well for him, which was Dominion Overwhelming Forces, which you can, if you want some of these deck lists, by the way, go check my tournament recap for Asperia. I think I'll put all the stuff in the description if I remember. If I forget to put something in the description that I said I would, tell me, because I'm not really keeping note of these, I just have to remember. But yeah, if you want to go check that stuff out, it's all on Mom Cards. I'll put the link to my tournament recap and where I go over all the lists briefly, if I reference any of the Asperia Cup lists. But yeah, he was playing an Overwhelming Forces Elf-type combo deck with Neva. There's also the Corruption version that makes him discard a lot. The Monogreen version is the most consistent, the Dominion version is the most explosive, and the Corruption version is the least consistent, but the best in, like, the mirror. And it's also slightly better against red because you're playing Flesh Sculptor. So, take that for what you will. The problem with Neva, and the reason it's not a Tier 1 deck, is because it's favored against a lot of matchups. Depending on the version, it's either good or okay against Wisdom Dominion, which is another Tier 2 deck. But it has the single worst matchup I have ever seen against Zash. Now, that doesn't sound too bad until you realize that Advanced Zash is the best deck in the entire game currently, and honestly, you run into it 40% of the time sometimes, 30-40% of the time on Ranked, which drops your win rate massively. And that is the reason Neva's not the best deck, because Zash crushes it. Every time you Reverence, he just sweeps your board, and he also has the aggressive openings, which you can't really deal with. So, that's why Neva gets knocked out from Tier 1 in this particular season. So, on to the next set, we've got Kayano variants. Now, this is not Reanimator Kayano, that we're getting to later. Kayano variants, I mean the things like Corruption Kayano, I mean things like the Dominion Kayano that's been running around a bit. Something similar to what I showed, but a more refined version. Those decks have been doing well. There's a red Kayano deck that Thiegel's been playing that I think is okay. I'm not sure if it's up to the same level, but I think it's okay. I think an optimized Kayano deck can make Tier 2. It's good against red, that's the main selling, it's good against red. The reason it's good against red is because all of their removal does 3 damage and all of your stuff has 4 health. Like, all of your stuff has 4 health, and you've got Harpies as well on turn 2 going second, or on turn 3 you can play it. Basically, you get a New Horizons for free on a Harpy and it doesn't die to Fireball anymore. so your Harpy starts wrecking them. And so Corruption Kayano at least is good against red, and that's enough to shift it from tier 3 to tier 2 in my book. So Kayano, the simpler Kayano variants, I think, are pretty good. Towards more of the bottom of tier 2, but they still fit in this particular environment. Next, we've got Advanced Despina with Wisdom Dominion Control. Now, this is another thing I did deck tech on fairly recently. Yeah. And Despina is one of those things where it's very, very good against red with Phoenixes. It's not good against red. It has protectors and helms, but it does have a few issues with some of the really aggressive openings. So it's about 50-50 against red. However, that's a good map. That's like good currently, since Advanced Ash is wrecking a lot of stuff. Silencers help in that regard. You've also got Karthus. It's good against Kayano. It's okay against Neva, depending on the version you're playing. If you're running more Silencers, it's bad. But if you're relying on things like Lamp, it's good. Karthus helps a lot to get rid of some of the big threats, while the smaller ones just kind of dawdle around. And Cataclysm is necessary to win that matchup. If you get 2, then you can actually win that matchup, so it's not unwinnable like some people think it is. Besides that, it is one of the more consistent decks, which means that it has the highest win rate against lower tier decks that make up about half the ladder, to be honest. Tier 3 and below decks make up about half the ladder, and Despina will usually beat them. Something in my throat today. Anyway, Despina will usually beat them, simply because of how consistent you are and how you can fetch things out of your opponent's deck and things like that. So it's very, very good in that regard. Alright, we've got 2 more things in tier 2. We've got Basic Zash Rush, which technically Burke is here as well, but he's a little bit worse. So we'll go with Basic Zash Rush. Now, this has dropped a tier because of the health increase. And also the metagame has shifted to make it better against basic Zash Rush type decks. I will say I think Advanced Zash is just straight better. Basic Zash can be used, I think it's good, but it's just not better than Advanced Zash. The hero power is so much stronger. I even think the hero power is stronger for rush decks in general. So I would not recommend running Zash. However, it's still a tier 2 deck. The only reason I don't recommend running it is because there's a better alternative just by switching the hero. But the rush decks still punish some of the greedy ones, and a lot of decks currently are very, very greedy. So, Zash, Flamebringer makes it onto the tier 2 slot. Now, the last tier 2 deck I want to talk about is Burning Rage. Now, Burning Rage runs Despina, basic Despina. Despina got buffed a little bit from 3 mana requirement to 2 mana requirement, which sounds like a lot, but you only really use it as a finisher in those decks anyway. So, it allows you to use it more for power turns. But the reason Burning Rage is good, you need to tweak it around a bit, but Burning Rage itself is good against the greedy decks. It's bad against red, but it's good against the greedy decks. And you've got Phoenixes, and you can run Helm, you've got Karthus, things like that. You just have a whole bunch of stuff that's good. Life gain is a bit more difficult now with the Vampirism change. It doesn't hit Burning Rage as hard, because you often have 3 creatures on the board, because you will hit with a Ramgath, so you only actually lose 1 more life. And if you have a Phoenix on the board as well, you gain a bunch of life. If you can survive to the mid to late game, it's good. The reason it's not a higher tier deck is because it has a few issues against some of the rush decks. It does have access to 4 Fire Blast, but because you can't use the actual Burning Rages against rush decks, it does shut down your consistency a bit, and that can really hurt. But anyway, so that's tier 2. On to tier 3. Now I mentioned that tier 3 is the okay section. It's not bad, it's just decent. These are the average decks that probably most people will be playing. They're not really above the curve in any way, they're just average. Starting with Hermeleon. Now, Fuzz was playing a Hermeleon green deck, and that's the deck I'm referring to. Basically, for anyone who hasn't seen Fuzz's Hermeleon green deck, again, refer to my Asperia Cup review, and there's a whole bunch of information for that in that description. But it was a deck that uses Ancient Treant, and I've been disconnected from it. Funny thing, I actually told Ivko about this yesterday, and he said he put it further up the priority list for changing, because that's annoying. But anyway, so basically it was using Ancient Treant along with Fey of Charm to steal multiple things with Hermeleon, using Instill Life to get them back, and using Call of Yalaya to get key pieces. And that was pretty much the whole deck. Now, the reason that works is because Ancient Treant can lock down 2 creatures with Tireless March, and Fey of Charm can steal something, and if the stolen creature attacks, it becomes exhausted, so they can't block with it. So Fey of Charm effectively gets past 2 blockers, which is ridiculous. So you lock down his entire board and just go ham with it. Now, the reason this is a tier 3 deck and not a tier 2 deck is because it has a lot of issues against things like red, because they can just clear up the trees over and over and over again. If they're playing Advanced Zash at least, they can start hero powering the board later on in the game. Once the Instill Life start coming out for 2 trees over and over and over and over and over again, they just hero power Fire Blast, and that's the end of it. On top of that, Fia hurts the deck a ton, because Fia Fireball will kill a tree, and that's a big deal, so red can deal with the stuff. The other problems with the deck are more to do with things like Wisdom Dominion. They can't deal with the Silencer, ever. And also, Advanced Neva is the worst matchup for Hermeleon, because it's a slower beatdown deck. It's not an aggressive deck, Hermeleon. It is a slower beatdown deck that gets to the mid-game and then beats your face in. But the Advanced Neva decks, we saw this with the finals, actually, of the Asperia, where Fuzz faced against Kindle, and the Hermeleon deck got smashed by Advanced Neva. It was not even close, because he just sets up his mana elves on the back, and then just combos off, and you can't lock down everything, and you just die. So that's why Hermeleon falls down a bit. The deck itself, I think, could be tier 2 worthy, but its matchups are not very good right now, which is why it falls down to tier 3. This will happen a lot with decks, and it's why, after balancing, even if a deck has no changes, it can actually switch its tier. So anyway, on to Coronis Implants. Now, Coronis Implants is a deck that I think CISP was playing. Yeah, CISP got to top 10 with Coronis Implants last season. If I remember, I'll put his deck tech, his article deck tech, in the description. This is going to be a long description. But yeah, Coronis, basically, Coronis is a bit below the curve in terms of a hero right now. So what he was doing was he was using an Implant blue deck along with Coronis, and he was using the Soul Ravens just to add tokens that he could actually use with his Implants. I've played against it a few times, haven't really played a good game against it. One of us has always drawn really badly, so I can't really evaluate it there. I'm not well versed enough in the deck to assess whether or not the hero is correct or anything like that, so go check his deck tech out. He knows way more about it than I do. But the point is, I don't think it's a good deck, a very good deck. I think it's an okay deck, and if you're good enough with the deck, which I'm guessing CISP is, since he's been playing it exclusively for a while now, then you can definitely get it into top 10. Although, that was with the bonus pool system, so again, take it with a bit of grain of salt. If he gets top 10 with it again this season, then yeah, it's definitely a solid deck. We'll also have to see how the patch affects it. It's one to keep an eye on, though. Alright. On to the next one. We've got Wisdom Corruption Control variants. There are 2 main heroes used with Wisdom Corruption Control. That's a long name. We've got Advanced Darius for the extra board clear and stalling, and then Advanced Nepharos to reanimate things. Now, personally, I think Advanced Darius might be slightly better because, you can use your hero power with Ziara and make it a 2 damage board wipe, basically, and that is crazy. It gets through most things. Nepharos does give you some extra sustainability, and it means you don't have to go double blue early when you also want to go double black, but then you play Silencers, so it doesn't really affect anything. It really doesn't. But I like Advanced Darius because it provides you a board sweeper against red decks that basically wins you the game sometimes. So I think this deck is decent. I did some rudimentary testing with it, so did Senelion. I don't think it's very good. However, I think if there was a bit of a boost to it, I think it'd definitely be a tier 2 deck. Currently, it is in fact a tier 3 deck. Now, for this point, I've just got other corruption variants. Now, this is everything that isn't zombies and demons. So, anything to do with controlling corruption variants, like Corruption Dominion, Corruption Order Control, anything to do with, Corruption Red, things like that. There's been a couple corruption decks running around. They're just not very good. They're okay, they're not very good. I think Zombies also fits in this category, where Zombies is around tier 3, it's not very good. It's not a tier 4 deck, but it's around tier 3. And Demons we'll get to a bit later, since Demons is not very good right now because of all the red. Now, as far as the rest of the stuff here, we've got Kayano Reanimator, which is something that a lot of these Scrolls guys were working on, and the deck is not good. It just isn't. This is why I said at the beginning, it's no offense to the people who made it, but it's not a good deck. It's just a very inconsistent Kayano deck. Very inconsistent. It also loses to Wisdom Dominion. Wisdom Dominion's a bad matchup, but at least with the Corruption version, you can just beat their face in really early with Bedeviled Fiends and just do a ton of damage that way and win. And you don't lose to non-advanced Despina variants, but kind of Reanimator just dies to Wisdom Dominion, because you've got Cataclysm to deal with all the overwhelming forces, and you've got Helm to deal with everything, basically. So, and Karthus deals with literally every threat in the deck, and the deck is very, very slow, whereas the Corruption Kayano deck that I've been playing gets out a threat every 2 turns, sometimes every turn. And sometimes that is too fast for them to deal with. Whereas with Reanimator Kayano, it's pretty consistent. Also, putting Reanimate into your graveyard lets him reanimate his Karthus with Bloodroll Matriarch. This is something I've done to people playing that deck, and it's one of the reasons the deck just isn't very good right now. It's not very good against red either, even though it plays Antriel. It's just not very good against red, so I think that the deck is very poorly positioned right now, and that's why it's in Tier 3. Next, we've got Angels. Now, Angels itself is not a bad deck. It's an okay deck, you can do well with it if you're experienced with it, like I would expect Clone to be able to do well with it, but it doesn't auto-win against red anymore because Advanced Ash can deal with things, it's bad against Wisdom Dominion, it's okay against everything else. But the point is, it's not astonishingly well positioned anymore, and a lot of the nerfs hit pretty hard, quite frankly. So, yeah, Angels has dropped a little bit, a lot. It used to be a Tier 2 deck. In the last season, the only reason for that was because it was bad against Wisdom Dominion, which was the best deck, but it has dropped a tier since it lost a little bit of its punch. Now, the last Tier 3 deck I want to talk about is my creation, I guess. It was more Snellion's idea, but the point is Wisdom Tempo. I actually want to do an update on Wisdom Tempo at some point. I'm waiting for a balance change that like puts it into Tier 2. Wisdom Tempo is okay. It's a bit clunky, but it's okay. I think if you were really experienced with the deck, you could probably get into top 20 or top 10 with the current ranking system with Wisdom Tempo. I've got to rank 1 before, but that was in the bonus pool system, so I don't really trust that result. But yeah, the deck is fine. It has some good matchups, especially against Order. Like, Soldiers is hilarious for Wisdom Tempo because all of their tokens are 1/1s. All of yours are 2/2s, and they can't interact with your backline. The Force Wielder buff helped the deck a lot. But then the meta changed to like Advanced Zash, and Basic Zash is bad against Wisdom Tempo, Advanced Zash is good against it. So yeah, basically it's good in the mid-rangey meta, but it's bad against the mid-rangey meta killer, which is Zash, so that holds it back a little bit. Now we're going on to Tier 4. These are the bad decks that I would never recommend picking up, even though I know a lot of people play them. I've tried some of these myself, it just doesn't work. First of all, Order, Dominion, Control. This is depressing to say this is Tier 4 because I played this deck a lot when the patch came out and it just wasn't good. Like, it was good for the first day when no one knew what they were doing, and then within 3 days the win rate dropped to like 40%. It was just awful. Basically, the reason I got a lot of hype was because you could run Stormcall Metropolis with the Rally the Peasants, the new one that costs 1 mana, to do 1 mana draw card, which is way better than basic Darius's rate. On top of that, you had the new Guard's Guard, that was good, anti-aggro card. You could also sack that every turn to make up for the fact and you could draw a card every single turn, which sounds insane. The problem is, Order doesn't add much. You've got Ray of Righteousness and Pacify. That's basically all it adds to a control shell. A couple finishers in like Antriel, but compared to Wisdom, where you can run Lamp, Library Guards, Protector, Artifact Removal, that's a big one, the Gnomes. Gnomes matter. And New Horizons, it's just... normally it'd be a Tier 3 deck, but the fact that if you just switch Order for Wisdom and the deck goes massively up on the actual tier list thing, it shoves it downwards. So, yeah, basic Lexa Control just isn't good right now. Next, Chalice variance, and no, I did not put this far down because I hate the deck, even though I do. But Chalice variance is pretty bad right now. A couple reasons. There's a lot of aggressive style mid-range decks which just beat you down over and over and over again. On top of that, there's a lot of artifact removal running around in Unicorns and Gnomes, and also the red decks are running Helm Remover in the Fireworkers. So as a result, it just, you can't keep a Chalice on the board anymore. You just cannot keep a Chalice on the board. On top of that, all the control decks for Dominion are running like 3 Mind Extorts, and you just can't keep a Chalice on the board. So that's why Chalice is really bad currently. A pain in the neck to play against, but really bad. Next we've got Basic Never Elves. Yeah, oh, Elves have fallen so far in the last 2 months. When Lamp was like 1 blue, they were so good. It was like a tier 1 deck, maybe tier 2. Now, it's bad against red, and it's just a worse version of red. It plays similar to red, but they don't have a lot of the extra punch. And the hero power is astonishingly powerful, the haste hero power, but it's not enough to carry the color. Nature itself has not been very good recently. Nature is basically hinged on 2 hero powers right now, Advanced Neva and Kayano. In fact, Advanced Neva's hero power is utterly broken. However, the deck itself isn't, because nature creatures are awful. Like, they're not terrible, but they're below average in general. Like, Haldir Rider and Ancient Treant and like Fae of Charm, I think, are the only ones that are decent. And even things like Sharpshooter is it's arguably just a worse protector and things like that. So nature creatures aren't very good, and that makes up for the fact that a lot of their hero powers are astonishingly broken on their own. But in the case of Basic Neva, Elves is not good currently, so giving haste to your 4/4 jungle death traps just doesn't cut it anymore. Alright, next 2 decks, and the last 2 decks on this list. Some of you may have noticed I haven't mentioned Soldiers. Here it is. Soldiers is awful. I know people want to play Soldiers, but it's a bad deck. It really is. It's terrible. It's bad against red, it's bad against Wisdom Dominion, it's bad against Advanced Neva, it's bad against every tier 2 deck. Like, it's just awful. It's very draw dependent, and honestly, Soldiers is so bad right now that even with a God draw, you still can't win sometimes. Like, I've beaten perfect draw Soldier decks with like multiple Master Tacticians, and I've beaten them with red. Because you just one Fire Blast and you lose your whole board, or a Fire Blast and a Word of Fire, and then the entire board dies if you've got like two Master Tacticians on it. You just Word of Fire one, Fire Blast the other, and everything dies. You can't have a deck that dies to like one Fire Blast. Or by the time, like, the only time I've lost to Soldiers recently was when it was 3 Master Tacticians and I was playing Advanced Neva, so I couldn't really come back from that. But if I missed 2 land drops in that game. I missed a lot of land drops actually in the stream yesterday, but I missed 2 land drops in that game and I would have had a Karthus, and that would have like won me the game immediately. So yeah, Soldiers just isn't good. However, the last deck I've got on here is Demons. Now, Demons is not normally a good deck. Now it actually has a hero power in Enoch. For anyone who doesn't know what I was talking about, basically before Enoch came out, there was 2 Corruption hero powers. Basic Nepharos and Advanced Nepharos. And anyone who played Demons noted that you never used the hero power ever. There was no reason to. Enoch can at least sacrifice a small demon to give you like a bit of reach and a finisher. Kind of. It also gives you some life gain, sure, but the problem is that Demons just takes too much damage, and if you're playing red, you just let the portal live and you kill them, and if you're playing any other deck, they're all running artifact removal or mind extort, and you just kill the portal and then they lose. That's basically, you kill the portal and then they have a mediocre corruption deck. So, yeah, Demons is not a good deck right now. Even when it does get the perfect draw, it's not a win currently, which is slightly depressing. And that's just a theme in some of the tier 4 decks, is that even when they get good draws, they're just not good. So anyway, thank you for watching my 30-minute long meta report. We've got a new patch coming out either tomorrow or the day after, and I intend to do these about once a month, just before a new patch comes out, so that not so much what to ladder with, but a definitive sort of report on what I've seen and what you should be keeping an eye on for in balance patches. Like maybe some of the tier 3 decks got buffed a bit and you should try those out, things like that. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback or have any questions, put it in the comment section below. I will attempt to remember everything I said I'd put in the description. Will probably fail. And now that I've been disconnected for inactivity, I will bring the video to a close. So as now, I'm Jotto, signing off.